The first thing I was aware of was the smell. Not the sterile antiseptic of a hospital room, but the cloying, expensive scent of jasmine and sandalwood, hanging heavy in the air-conditioned silence. The second thing was the pain, or rather, the profound, shocking lack of it. The constant, gnawing ache that had been my companion for the last 3 years of my life was simply gone. My eyes snapped open. I was lying on a bed wider than my entire former apartment, draped in silk the color of moonlight. The ceiling was a vast, smooth expanse of white, and a single, minimalist chandelier hung like a frozen constellation. This was not my life. My life had ended in a beige-walled room, the steady beep of a heart monitor, my final lullaby. Host connection established. Welcome, user Lin Mei. A voice, cold and devoid of inflection, spoke not to my ears, but directly into the heart of my consciousness. I jolted upright, my hands slim, elegant hands that weren't mine clutching at the silk sheets. You have been reincarnated in the body of Maylene, aunt and legal guardian to Jiawei. Your primary directive is to adhere to the character parameters of the wicked aunt archetype. What is this? I whispered, my new voice a husky, unfamiliar alto. I am your system, your interface with this narrative. The terms of your continued existence are simple. You must not break character. You are to emotionally neglect and psychologically pressure your nephew, Jiawei, to foster the resilience and ruthlessness required for his future as a corporate titan. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my confusion. His future?
What are you talking about?
I don't want to hurt a child. Deviation from your designated role will result in catastrophic system failure and the immediate termination of your host body. This is non-negotiable. An image flashed in my mind, my new body collapsing, the life snatched away as quickly as it had been given. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I had fought so hard to live. The thought of losing the second chance, however strange, was terrifying. Your first directive is imminent. Proceed to the dining area. Initiate first contact. Driven by a fear greater than my disorientation, I swung my legs out of bed. My body felt strong, vital. I caught my reflection in a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman staring back was severe, beautiful in a way that was all sharp angles and calculated elegance. Her eyes, my eyes now, were dark and held a coldness I didn't recognize. This was Malin. This was me. I walked out of the bedroom and into a living space that was less a home and more an architectural digest spread. Everything was shades of gray, white, and chrome. It was stunning and utterly soulless. The only sound was the soft hum of the central air conditioning. I followed the sound of faint clinking to the dining area. And there he was, a small boy, drowning in a large, high-backed chair at a marble table that could seat 12. He was meticulously eating a bowl of plain rice congee, his small hands gripping the porcelain spoon with intense concentration. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Jiawei. He didn't look up as I entered. His silence felt less like peace and more like a defense mechanism. Directive: replace his current meal with a challenging, unpleasant food. Establish dominance. Suggestion: bitter melon stir-fry from the kitchen. My feet felt like blocks of lead. The kitchen, a clinical space of stainless steel, was visible through a pass-through. I saw the plate there, piled high with the green, warty vegetable, stir-fried to a dull sheen. My stomach churned. This was my first test. My price for survival. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked up the plate. It was still warm. I approached the table. Jiawei finally looked up. His eyes were wide, dark pools in a pale, solemn face. There was no light in them, only a quiet, waiting apprehension. He looked like a baby bird expecting a predator. Kanji is for invalids, I stated, my new voice cold and flat, betraying none of the turmoil inside. I placed the plate of bitter melon in front of him with a definitive clink that echoed in the silent room.
Eat this.
You need to learn to handle bitter things. I saw the flicker in his eyes. Not defiance, but a deep, weary resignation that no child should ever possess. He looked from my face to the plate of dark green lumps. He slowly put down his spoon, pushed his bowl of congee away, and picked up his chopsticks. His small fingers struggled to get a good grip on a piece of the melon. He finally managed to lift it to his mouth and took a bite. I watched, my own throat constricting. I knew what bitter melon tasted like. It was an assault, a wave of pure, unadulterated bitterness that could make an adult flinch. Jiawei's face did crumple for a second. His little nose scrunched up, and his eyes squeezed shut. He shuddered violently. But he didn't spit it out.
He didn't cry.
He chewed, swallowed, and took a shuddering breath. A single, traitorous tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek, which he quickly wiped away with the back of his hand as if angry at his own weakness. Then he picked up his chopsticks for another bite. My own eyes stung. This wasn't a child being difficult. This was a child who had already learned that protest was futile, that resistance only brought more pain. He was swallowing the bitterness, both literal and metaphorical, because he believed he had no other choice. Directive accomplished. Host compliance confirmed. The system's message felt like a brand. I had done it. I had secured my place in this world. I had taken my first step as the wicked ant. But as I stood there, watching this small, lonely boy forcing down a plate of misery in a multi-million-dollar prison, a different kind of resolve began to crystallize within me. The system said I couldn't break character. It said I had to be wicked. It never said I couldn't be creative. Maybe being wicked wasn't about causing pain for its own sake. Maybe, just maybe, it could be about building a fortress. If I had to be the villain in his story, I would be the one that forged him in fire, not broke him in shadow. I would be the harsh wind that forces a sapling to sink deep, strong roots, not the frost that kills it. He finished the last piece, placed his chopsticks neatly on the holder, and looked up at me, his expression once again a blank, careful mask. "May I be excused, Auntie?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I gave a single, curt nod, not trusting myself to speak. He slid off the chair and padded silently out of the room, a small, solitary figure in the vast, cold expanse of the penthouse. I was left alone with the empty plate and the ghost of a single, silent terror. The game was on, and I had just made my first, dangerous move. The silence after Jiawei left was heavier than the marble table between me and the empty plate of bitter melon. The system's presence in my mind was a cold, humming static, a constant reminder of my leash. I stood there for a long moment, the ghost of that single tear seared onto my retinas. Directive. Isolation protocol. Cancel the child's extracurricular activities. Art class is deemed non-essential and fosters unproductive sentimentality. Art class. The words conjured an image of a small, quiet boy hunched over a piece of paper, finding a refuge I was now ordered to destroy. My fingers curled into fists, the perfectly manicured nails digging into my palms. This was the next test. I had to be smarter. I found my way to Mayleen's home office, another monument to cold luxury. A sleek laptop sat on a glass desk. A few clicks, and I accessed the family schedule. There it was, Jiawei, Watercolor Fundamentals, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m., Master Artist Fun Studio. Canceling it would be simple. A single email, but that felt blunt, uninspired. The system wanted me to crush his spirit. I decided I would, instead, forge it in a different fire. I found the contact for Master Artist Fun. The bio was intimidating, a renowned traditional painter known for his brutal critiques and old-school discipline. Students reportedly left his studio in tears.
Perfect.
I drafted an email, my tone mimicking the cold efficiency I imagined Malin would use. Masterfun, my nephew, Jiawei, currently attends your beginner's class. This is insufficient. I am enrolling him in your advanced masterclass. I expect you to be unsparing in your criticism. He is to meet your highest standards, not those for children. Failure to do so will result in our immediate withdrawal and a cessation of my patronage. Malin, I hit send before the system could question my methods. Query, action deviates from standard isolation protocol. Explanation. Isolation isn't just about taking things away. I thought back, my mental voice laced with a scorn I hoped it would buy. It's about making him feel his own inadequacy. Surrounding him with superior talent and a merciless teacher is a more refined form of psychological pressure. He will feel alone in a crowd. This is advanced neglect. There was a pause, a flicker of processing static. Analysis. Logic acceptable. Directive accomplished through alternate parameters. Compliance confirmed. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding. One battle won. Later that afternoon, the nanny, a silent, nervous woman named Mrs. Lee, was preparing to take Jiawei to school. I observed from the hallway. She was helping him into a simple, slightly faded polo shirt and trousers that were size too big. He looked like a little ghost, meant to blend into the walls. Directive. Ensure the child's appearance reflects humility. Discourage vanity. The original Mayleen's twisted logic was insidious. She didn't dress him in rags. That would be too obvious. She dressed him in clothes that were just cheap enough, just ill-fitting enough to make him look uncared for. In a world of unimaginable wealth, it was a subtle, constant humiliation.
No.
Not on my watch. Mrs. Lee, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. She jumped, her hands fluttering. Those are unacceptable. Jia Wei froze, his shoulders tensing, expecting another reprimand. I walked to his walk-in closet, a space larger than my old bedroom, and threw open the doors. Inside were rows of beautiful, expensive children's clothing, still with tags. I yanked a sharply tailored little blazer and a pair of crisp trousers from a hanger. Then I found a silk dress shirt and a miniature tie. I thrust them at Mrs. Lee. He will wear this. The Lin family does not skimp on appearances. We are not paupers. My voice was sharp, but my intention was a shield. If he was going to be looked at, let them look at him with envy, not pity. Jia Wei stared at the clothes in Mrs. Lee's hands, then at me, utter confusion in his eyes. He was silent as Mrs. Lee quickly helped him change. When he was dressed, he looked transformed, like a little prince. The clothes fit him perfectly, lending a dignity to his small, slender frame. He kept running his fingers over the smooth silk of the tie, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture of wonder. Look at me when I'm talking to you. I snapped, and he flinched, his head snapping up. I knelt down, my movements sharp and intimidating. I straightened his tie with a jerk, my face close to his. You represent this family now. You will not slouch. You will not mumble. You will be the most impressive child in that school. Do you understand? His lower lip trembled for a fraction of a second before he controlled it. He gave a stiff, tiny nod. Good. I stood up. Now, the car is waiting. Don't dawdle. I watched them go, Mrs. Lee shepherding him into the private elevator. Just before the doors closed, I saw him glance down at his new blazer, a flicker of something not happiness, but a faint, fragile pride crossing his face. The rest of the day was a blur of navigating my new life. I explored the penthouse, a gilded cage that felt more like a museum. I checked the bank accounts, the numbers made me dizzy. $3 million a month, just for expenses. It was a fortune built on the back of this lonely child's future misery. When the time came to pick him up, I didn't send Mrs.
Lee.
I had the driver, a kind-faced man in his 50s named Mr. Zhang, take me. I sat in the back of the silent, opulent car, my stomach a knot of nerves. The Veritas Academy was less a school and more a fortress of privilege, all manicured lawns and imposing neoclassical architecture. I instructed Mr. Zhang to park conspicuously at the front, next to a row of other luxury vehicles. I saw other children loud, confident, bursting with a life that seemed alien to Jia Wei piling into their cars. Then I saw him. He was standing a little apart from the main crowd, waiting. And he wasn't alone. 3 other boys, larger and louder, were circling him like sharks. Hey Lin, did you rob a bank? One of them jeered, poking a finger at his blazer. Or, did your scary aunt finally decide you're not a charity case? Another laughed. Jia Wei stood perfectly still, his head lowered, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was using the stillness as a shield, just as he had with me. The sight sent a white-hot fury through me. This was my fault. My solution had made him a target. As a wicked aunt, the canonical move would be to do nothing. Let him be toughened by the cruelty of his peers. I swung the car door open and stepped out, my heels clicking sharply on the pavement. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked with a slow, deliberate authority that made the 3 boys freeze mid-taunt. Jia Wei, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a shard of ice. Get in the car. He looked up, startled, and hurried towards me, relief washing over his pale features. I turned my gaze to the bullies. I didn't glare. I simply looked at them, my expression one of cold, clinical disdain, as if they were something unpleasant I'd found on the sole of my shoe. Your parents, I said, my tone conversational yet deadly quiet, must be so disappointed. All that money, and they've raised street urchins. I let the words hang in the air. I'll be sure to mention it to them at the next board meeting. Now, run along. The help is waiting. Their faces, once smug, were now blotchy with a mixture of fear and shame. They scattered without another word. I got back into the car. Jia Wei was already inside, pressed against the far door, watching me. The drive home was silent. When we pulled into the underground garage of our building, he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Auntie." The gratitude in his voice was a knife to my heart. He was thanking me for a rescue that was only necessary because of my intervention. I looked at him, at the faint hope warring with the fear in his eyes. I had to shatter it. I had to be the villain. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be foolish. I wasn't protecting you." I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I was protecting the Lin name. You are an extension of this family. An insult to you is an insult to me. Remember that. Your pride is irrelevant. My reputation is not." The light in his eyes didn't completely die, but it dimmed, overshadowed by a new layer of understanding. He nodded slowly, the fragile connection I'd felt moments ago severed. But as he trudged toward the elevator, his small shoulders once again carrying a weight they shouldn't have to bear, I saw him subtly straighten his blazer. The armor, though forced upon him, was still there. And for now, that had to be enough. The days settled into a strange, tense rhythm. A rhythm conducted by the cold, humming static of the system in my mind and punctuated by the silent, watchful presence of Jia Wei. The penthouse was a stage, and we were its only actors, performing a play where I was the villain and he was what? The stoic victim? The resilient survivor? I was still trying to figure it out. My victory with the art class had been a dangerous precedent. The system had accepted my logic, but I felt its scrutiny intensify, a silent watcher judging my every move. I had to be careful. One misstep, one moment of genuine kindness, and it would all be over. One evening, a week after the bitter melon incident, I was in the living room, pretending to read a financial report on a tablet. Jia Wei was on the floor, a respectable distance away, quietly assembling a complex architectural model of the Eiffel Tower. The concentration on his face was absolute. This, I had learned, was his escape. He lost himself in structures, in creating order from chaos. Directive, enforce practicality. The child's activities are too fantastical. Assign a task that teaches real-world consequences. My mind raced. What constituted a real-world consequence for an 8-year-old? Making him balance a mock stock portfolio? It was absurd. Just then Mr. Zhang entered, his kind face looking unusually troubled. "Madam Malin," he said, bowing slightly. "There is a situation in the private garden." The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the skyscraper, with a sprawling, manicured rooftop garden that was Mayleen's pride. I sighed, feigning irritation. "What is it?" "It appears a stray animal has found its way in. A dog, I believe. It's made a mess of the herb planters." Jia Wei's had snapped up from his model, his eyes wide with instant, undisguised interest.
A dog.
A dangerous idea began to form. "Come," I commanded Jia Wei, my voice sharp. "You will see what happens when chaos intrudes upon order." He scrambled to his feet, following me and Mr. Zhang through the glass doors and into the twilight of the garden. The air was cool, scented with night-blooming jasmine. And there, amidst the trampled lavender and shredded basil, was the culprit. It wasn't much of a dog. It was a puppy, small and scrawny, with matted, mud-colored fur and one ear that flopped comically. It was shivering, huddled against a ceramic pot, and one of its back legs was held at an awkward angle. When it saw us, it tried to growl, but the sound came out as a pathetic, high-pitched whine. It was the most helpless thing I'd ever seen. Jia Wei gasped, a soft, pain sound. He took an involuntary step forward, his small hand reaching out. Directive: remove the contaminant. Have the groundskeeper dispose of it immediately. Reinforce the danger of sentimental attachments. Dispose of it. The words were like a physical blow. I looked at Jia Wei's face, at the raw, aching empathy written there. This was the boy who was supposed to become a ruthless titan? All I saw was a child whose heart was still soft enough to break for a broken creature. I couldn't let them hurt this animal. But I also couldn't simply save it. That would be a direct violation. I turned to Jia Wei, my expression a mask of cold disdain. Look at it.
Weak.
Injured. A burden. This is what sentimentality looks like. It's a liability. His lower lip trembled, but he didn't look away from the puppy. "Mr. Zhang," I said, my voice cutting. "Call a veterinarian. The expensive one. Have it brought to the service entrance. I don't want it tracking filth through the main rooms." Mr. Zhang nodded, a flicker of surprise in his eyes before he schooled his features. Yes, madam. I then looked down at Jia Wei. This is your lesson in consequences. Your foolish compassion for this creature has now incurred a financial cost. Its well-being is now your responsibility. He stared at me, confused. My responsibility? Yours, I confirmed, my tone leaving no room for argument. You will pay its veterinary bills from your allowance. You will be the one to feed it, to train it, to clean up its messes. You will learn the weight of a life you chose to interrupt. I leaned down, my face close to his. This is not a pet. This is a punishment. Do you understand? Its suffering, its failures, its very existence will be on your head. It was a brutal, twisted framework. But within it, I had built a cage of safety for the puppy. By making it a punishment, I had given it a reason to stay. Jia Wei looked from my harsh face to the shivering puppy. A strange resolve hardened his young features. The fear was gone, replaced by a solemn sense of purpose. He nodded, a single, decisive movement. I understand, Auntie. An hour later, the vet had left. The puppy, now cleaned, revealed itself to be a light tan color with soulful brown eyes. Its leg was bandaged, and it was sleeping in a makeshift bed of towels in the service kitchen, having wolfed down a bowl of premium dog food. Jia Wei sat on the floor beside it, not touching it, just watching it breathe. What will you call it? I asked from the doorway, my arms crossed. He thought for a long moment. Lucky, he said softly. I almost laughed. It was the most tragically optimistic name I had ever heard. Fitting, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. It's lucky you were foolish enough to beg for it. Now, remember your duties. It's your responsibility. Your first one is to take it outside to relieve itself. The garden is off limits. Use the service elevator to the designated area. I turned to leave, but his small voice stopped me. Auntie. I glanced back. Thank you, he whispered, his eyes still on the sleeping puppy. My breath caught in my throat. He was thanking me again. For a punishment. For a burden. The irony was so sharp it was painful. Save your gratitude, I said, my voice harsher than I intended. You'll need it for when it chews up something you love. I walked away, leaving him alone with his punishment. Later that night, as I passed his bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, I heard the soft, rhythmic sound of his voice. I peeked in. He was sitting on the floor in his pajamas, reading a picture book to Lucky, who was curled up in his lap, gnawing gently on the edge of the book. Jia Wei's voice, usually so quiet, was clear and steady as he sounded out the words. And the little engine said, I think I can. He wasn't just reading to the dog. He was practicing. He was learning because I had hired a brutal tutor. He was caring for a creature because I had framed it as a penalty. He was finding his voice because I had given him a reason to use it. I pulled the door quietly shut, my heart a tumult of conflicting emotions. I was the wicked aunt. I was the source of all his pressures. But as I stood in the dark, silent hallway, a terrifying, hopeful thought took root. What if the pressure wasn't crushing him? What if, against all odds and the system's designs, it was polishing him? The following Tuesday, the air in the penthouse was thick with a nervous energy that had nothing to do with me. Jia Wei stood by the door, his small art portfolio case clutched in both hands. He was dressed impeccably, as per my new rule, but his usual stillness was replaced by a faint, anxious tremor. He was waiting for Mr. Zhang to take him to his first session with Master Fan. I observed him from the living room, sipping a cup of tea that tasted like ash. My gambit with the art tutor was a dangerous one. I had sold it to the system as advanced psychological pressure, but the truth was I was throwing him into the deep end, hoping he could swim. If Master Fan broke him completely, the system would deem it a success, and I would have to live with the consequences. Directive: post-session debrief. Extract accounts of failure and inadequacy. Amplify the tutor's criticisms. The system was eager for a report. I felt like a prison warden waiting for a prisoner to return from interrogation. When Mr. Zhang brought him back 2 hours later, Jia Wei's posture was different. He wasn't slumping in defeat, nor was he walking tall. He moved with a strange, focused gravity. He went straight to his room without a word, his face unreadable. I gave him 15 minutes before I followed. I found him not at his architectural models, but at the small desk in his room. He had a piece of expensive watercolor paper taped to a board and was meticulously washing a background of pale, somber gray. Well, I demanded, leaning against the door frame. I assume it was a disaster. Did the master laugh at your childish scribbles? Jiawei's brush didn't falter. He didn't look up. He said my technique was undeveloped and my understanding of form was non-existent. His voice was flat, merely reporting. My heart sank. It was starting. Then he said, Jiawei continued, dipping his brush into a deeper gray, that my line was surprisingly confident for someone so untrained. He said I have a stubborn hand. I blinked. A stubborn hand? That didn't sound like ridicule. He made me draw a single pair for the entire session, Jiawei said. Over and over. He said I was not to paint what I thought a pair looked like, but what I saw. The bruises, the stem, the way the light curved. He finally looked up at me, and to my astonishment, there was no shame in his eyes. There was a fierce, burning concentration. He said I was wasting his time, but that if I was going to waste it, I would do it perfectly. He turned back to his paper, adding a shadow with a precise flick of his wrist. He said I have to draw 100 pairs before he will let me touch a brush again. 100 pairs. It was monastic in its discipline. It was also exactly the kind of relentless, unforgiving challenge that could either crush a soul or forge one of steel. And Jiawei, it seemed, had chosen the latter. The system was silent for a moment, processing. Analysis. Tutor's methodology aligns with pressure, parameters. Target's reaction, absorption, not collapse. Continue monitoring. It was a stay of execution. I had passed the test, and so, it seemed, had Jiawei. Later that week, the consequences of owning a dog began to manifest. I was woken at dawn by a frantic scratching at my bedroom door. I opened it to find a frantic Jiawei in his pajamas, with a guilty-looking Lucky wagging his tail beside a small puddle on the polished floor of the hallway. He couldn't hold it, Auntie. I'm sorry. I slept through silence. I snapped, my voice raspy with sleep. Excuses are the refuge of the incompetent. Cleaning supplies are in the service closet. You will sanitize this entire area until I cannot smell a trace of it. Then you will take the dog out and you will do it again. This is your responsibility. Your failure.
Now fix it.
His face fell, but he nodded, his small jaw set. He marched off to the closet, returning with a bucket and sponge that were comically large for him. I watched from my doorway as he got on his hands and knees, scrubbing diligently, whispering reassurances to the puppy who was trying to lick his ear. It was a pitiful scene. And yet, it was also a scene of profound responsibility. He wasn't crying. He wasn't complaining. He was dealing with the mess, both literal and metaphorical. This became our new normal. The pristine, silent penthouse was now punctuated by the skittering of puppy claws on marble and Jiawei's firm, gentle commands. No, Lucky. Sit. Good boy. He carried a roll of biodegradable bags in his pocket like a tiny, serious park ranger. He researched training techniques on the family tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. One afternoon, I found him in the kitchen, carefully measuring out kibble. Lucky was sitting perfectly, watching the scoop with rapt attention. He listens to you, I observed, my tone neutral. Jiawei looked up, surprised I had spoken without a directive. He's smart, he said simply. He just needed to know the rules. The irony of his statement hung in the air between us. He, too, was just trying to learn the rules of his own gilded cage. A few days later, a breakthrough occurred. I was in my office when I heard a crash from the living room, followed by a sharp yelp from Lucky and a gasp from Jiawei. I rushed out to find a priceless Ming-style vase in 100 pieces on the floor. Lucky, terrified, had backed into a corner, his tail between his legs. Jiawei stood frozen, his face a mask of pure horror. This wasn't a puddle. This was a catastrophe. Directive. Maximum consequence. This is a teachable moment in the cost of failure. I walked over slowly, the crunch of porcelain under my heels sounding like a death knell. Jiawei flinched, bracing for the storm. I looked from the shattered vase to the terrified dog to my nephew's ashen face. The cost of this vase was nothing to Maline's fortune, but the cost of his spirit was everything. This, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, is what happens when you lose control. Your sentiment for this animal has now resulted in the destruction of a family heirloom. Tears welled in his eyes, but he stubbornly fought them back. I'm sorry, Auntie. It was my fault. I wasn't watching him closely enough. Your apology is worthless, I stated. It does not unbreak the vase. I pointed a finger at Lucky, who whined. That creature is a liability. It is weak-willed and destructive. Perhaps it is not worth the trouble it causes. The color drained from Jia Wei's face.
No. Please.
I'll pay for it. I'll work it off. I'll do anything. Please don't make him go away. He was begging now, the stoic facade completely shattered. This was the raw, unfiltered fear the system wanted me to cultivate. I let the silence stretch, letting him stew in his terror. Then I spoke. Very well. The cost of this vase will be deducted from your allowance for the next 18 months. You will also perform additional chores for Mrs.
Lee.
Every Saturday, you will clean the entire service kitchen. This is the price of your failure. Remember it. The relief that washed over him was so profound his knees almost buckled. Thank you, Auntie. Thank you. I will, I promise. He scrambled over to Lucky, gathering the trembling dog into his arms. It's okay, boy. It's okay. We're okay. As I walked away, leaving him to clean up the porcelain shards, the system pinged. Directive accomplished. Target has experienced significant stress and financial consequence. Compliance confirmed. It was a victory for the system. But as I listened to the soft, hiccuping sounds of Jia Wei comforting his dog, I knew it was a victory for me, too. I had pushed him to the brink, and he hadn't broken. He had negotiated. He had accepted a monumental punishment to protect something he loved. He had shown a fierceness I hadn't seen before. The pressure was mounting, but the diamond, it seemed, was beginning to form. The shattered vase marked a subtle shift in the penthouse. It was as if the sound of breaking porcelain had fractured not just the artifact, but the fragile, performative silence we had been living in. Jia Wei, true to his word, became a ghost of industry. On Saturdays, I would hear the splash of water and the scent of lemon-scented cleaner emanating from the service kitchen.
He didn't complain.
He simply did the work, his small form moving with a grim determination that was far older than his 8 years. Lucky, perhaps sensing the gravity of his crime, became better behaved. He followed Jia Wei like a fuzzy, four-legged shadow, his training accelerating under Jia Wei's patient, consistent command. The messes became fewer, the chaos more controlled. It was a small, quiet victory in our war of attrition. Meanwhile, the system continued its cold vigilance. Directive: academic excellence is non-negotiable. His current grade in mathematics is unacceptable. Rectify this. I checked his school portal. He had a B+ in a class of third graders. The absurdity was breathtaking. The original Malian standards were a form of madness. I summoned him to the study. He stood before the vast glass desk, Lucky sitting obediently at his heels. A B+, I stated, letting the words hang in the air like a condemnation. Explain this mediocrity. He looked down at his shoes. The word problems are confusing. Confusing? I repeated, my voice dripping with scorn. Life is a word problem, Jia Wei. If you cannot decode the simple logic of a math worksheet, you'll be devoured by the world. I pulled out a thick, advanced math workbook. I'd had delivered a book meant for 5th graders. I tossed it onto the desk in front of him. You'll complete the first 3 chapters by the end of the week. You will not sleep until you understand them. He paled, looking at the dense text and complex equations. But Auntie, there are no buts, I interrupted. Your failure is a reflection on me. I will not be embarrassed. It was the same line I'd used about the bullies. A conveniently flexible justification for the system. That night, I found him asleep at his desk, his head pillowed on the open workbook, a pencil still clutched in his hand. Lucky was curled around his feet, on guard. For a long moment, I just watched them. The sight of his small, exhausted form, defeated by problems he wasn't ready for, sent a pang of genuine guilt through me. This was my doing. I saw the problem he'd been struggling with circled in faint pencil. If a train leaves station A traveling at 60 miles per hour and another train leaves station B, it wasn't the math. It was the abstraction. He couldn't connect the numbers to a reality he understood. The next day, I changed tactics. After his art lesson, where he was now on pair number 37, his sketches showing a startling improvement in observational detail, I didn't send him to his room with the workbook. Come, I commanded. I led him and a wary Lucky down to the building's private garage. I pointed to the 2 family cars, the silent, black luxury sedan and my own sleek, silver sports car. The sedan is station A. My car is station B, I said. His head tilted in confusion. The garage is 100 feet long. If the sedan moves forward at 2 feet per second and my car moves towards it at 3 feet per second, how long until they collide? Calculate it. You have 30 seconds before I have Mr. Zhang start the engines. His eyes widened in panic, then darted between the two cars. I saw the gears turning in his head, the abstract problem suddenly terrifyingly concrete. He dropped to his knees, using his finger to scribble frantic calculations on the dusty concrete floor. 20 seconds, he blurted out, just as I raised my hand to signal Mr.
Zhang.
I lowered my hand. Show me your work. He explained, his voice rushed but clear, his logic flawless. The B-plus student had solved a problem years beyond his grade in under 30 seconds. I gave a curt nod. Adequate. It seems you are not entirely hopeless. From now on, you will do your math here, using the cars. The dimensions of the garage are your worksheet. It was unorthodox, chaotic, and utterly effective. Query: methodology deviates from standard academic pressure. Standard pressure yields standard results. I thought back, my mental tone bored. I am creating associative stress. He will now connect mathematical failure with tangible, immediate consequences. The anxiety will sharpen his focus. It is a more potent form of conditioning. The system was silent. I had learned its language. It valued results, no matter how they were achieved. A few days later, a different kind of crack appeared. I was in the dressing room, and a wave of dizziness hit me so suddenly I had to grab the wardrobe for support. A familiar, cold fear trickled down my spine. It was the same lightheadedness, the same fleeting weakness I'd felt in my last life, right before the diagnosis. I'd been so focused on Jiawei and the system, I neglected to consider this body. What if Malin had an underlying condition? What if my second chance had an expiration date? I managed to get to my phone and book a full, discreet medical workup at the most exclusive private hospital in Xanadu Port for the following day. I told no one. That evening, Jiawei was quieter than usual. He'd finished his kitchen punishment and was reading to Lucky on the floor of the living room. I was on the sofa, pretending to read, but my mind was a whirlwind of medical anxieties. Auntie,
He said softly.
what is it? My voice was sharper than I intended, frayed by fear. He flinched but pressed on. My school, they are having an art exhibition in a month. For the foundation year. Master Fan said. He said I should enter. My pears. The request hung in the air. It was a moment of profound vulnerability. He was asking for permission to be seen. And the system pounced. Directive: refuse. Public displays of unvetted talent are a risk. His failure would be public humiliation. Forbid it. It was the obvious, the safe wicket move. To crush this budding hope. To keep him hidden. But I thought of the dizziness. I thought of the possibility that my time here might be limited. I thought of the 100 pairs, and the stubborn hand that drew them. I looked at him, at the fragile hope in his eyes, braced for rejection. An exhibition? I said, my tone dripping with disdain. To display your amateur attempts to the entire school? I let the silence torture him for a moment longer. Very well. His eyes widened in shock. But, I continued, leaning forward, you will not embarrass me. You will not paint a pear. You will create an original piece. And it will be exceptional. If it is mediocre, if it is forgettable, you will withdraw from Master Fan's class permanently. This is not an opportunity. This is an ultimatum. It was a brutal frame. I was turning his passion into a high-stakes exam with catastrophic consequences for failure. The system would see it as immense pressure. Jiawei, I hoped, would see it as a chance. The hope in his eyes didn't dim. It hardened into resolve. I understand, Auntie. I will not embarrass you. He went back to his book, his shoulders set with a new purpose. I had given him a mountain to climb. I could only pray he was strong enough to reach the summit. The next day, at the hospital, as a team of efficient nurses ran test after test, I stared at the sterile white ceiling. The fear was a physical presence in the room. I had become invested. In the boy, in the dog, in this twisted, gilded life. The thought of it being taken away was no longer a fear of personal extinction, but a deep, aching worry for the small, stoic boy I would leave behind in this beautiful, heartless cage. I had started this wanting only to survive. Now, I was terrified that my survival might not be enough. The hospital room was a vacuum, sucking all sound and hope from the air. The doctor, a man with a face as placid as a mountain lake, held the tablet containing my results. My new, healthy heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. "There is no easy way to say this, Ms. Lynn," he began, and the world narrowed to a pinprick. I saw the rest of my second chance, the brief, stolen years stretching out before me, ending in the same sterile way as my first life. "Your body is exhibiting signs of severe, prolonged psychological stress," he continued. "Elevated cortisol, compromised immune response, adrenal fatigue. Frankly, your physical health is perfect. It's your mental state that is critically unwell." The relief was so violent it left me dizzy. It wasn't cancer. It wasn't a failing organ. It was stress. The constant, gnawing pressure of the system's presence, the emotional tightrope I walked every second of every day, was quite literally making me sick. The irony was a bitter pill. My performance of being unfeeling was causing my body to scream in protest. Analysis. Host vitals indicate physiological instability. Recalibrating. Wickedness. Parameters to 85% intensity to preserve host integrity. Even my illness was being co-opted, used as a reason to slightly loosen my leash. I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. I returned to the penthouse that afternoon feeling like a ghost. The news was a reprieve, but it changed nothing. The prison was still there. The warden had just granted me a slightly larger cell. I found Jiawei in his room, but he wasn't drawing. He was staring at a blank sheet of watercolor paper, his expression one of utter despair. A dozen crumpled balls of paper littered the floor around him. Lucky was whining softly, nudging his hand with a wet nose. "Well," I asked from the doorway, my voice weary. "Have you produced a masterpiece, or are you just wasting expensive paper?" He jumped, hastily trying to smooth out one of the crumpled attempts. It was a painting of a pear, technically better than his first ones, but stiff, lifeless. "It's not right," he mumbled, his shoulders slumping. "Obviously." I walked in and picked up the drawing. "It's perfect, and utterly boring. You've learned to copy what you see, but you feel nothing for it. No wonder Masterfin finds you tedious." His head shot up, hurt flashing in his eyes. "I'm trying. Trying is for failures." I shot back, the old script coming easily, fueled by my own frayed nerves. "The exhibition is in 3 weeks. Do you think the world cares that you tried? They will see only a mediocre boy from a prestigious family, proving that bloodlines can be diluted by incompetence." The words were cruel, but I pushed on, a new, dangerous idea forming. "This," I said, flicking the perfect, soulless pear, "is a lie. You are trying to paint strength, but you don't know strength. You only know pressure." I leaned in, my voice dropping. "So paint that. Paint the bruise on the pear. The rot. The flaw. Paint what it feels like to be perfect on the outside and shattered within. If you cannot be skilled, at least be honest." I turned and left, leaving him stunned amidst the wreckage of his failed attempts. The next day, I enacted the next phase of my academic pressure campaign. I took him to the corporate headquarters of the Lin Group for the first time. The building was a towering spear of glass and steel, a monument to cold ambition. Employees bowed and scurried out of our way as I marched him through the hushed, opulent halls. I led him into the main boardroom. It was a cavernous space with a table as long as a swimming pool, overlooking the entire city. "Sit," I commanded, pointing to the head of the table, a chair so large it swallowed him whole. He climbed up, his eyes wide, dwarfed by the immense power the room represented. Directive: instill the weight of legacy. His futility in this space should be palpable. "This," I said, my voice echoing in the silence, "is your inheritance. A kingdom built by your grandfather and father. Every person in this building, every asset we own, will one day be your responsibility." I walked slowly around the table, my heels the only sound. "And you cannot even solve a third-grade word problem without turning it into a game with cars. The thought is laughable." I saw him shrink in the chair, the intended effect taking hold.
Good.
Let the system see it. Then I stopped at the window, looking down at the ant-like people and cars below. But a kingdom is not just an asset sheet. It is a living thing. It requires a ruler, not just an accountant. I turned back to him. "Your first lesson in rulership. Identify the flaw. Look around this room. What is the greatest weakness here?" It was a question far beyond his years. He looked around, bewildered, at the perfect furniture, the state-of-the-art technology. I don't know." "Look harder," I snapped. "The flaw is not in the objects. It is in the people. It is in the silence. It is in the fear. Everyone in this building is so afraid of making a mistake that they have forgotten how to be great. That is the cancer you will one day have to cut out. That is the bruise on this perfect pair. I was no longer just talking about the company. I was talking about us. About him. About the perfect, silent prison of the penthouse. He was silent for a long time, staring at the empty chairs, his young mind grappling with the abstract concept of institutional rot. The lesson in corporate strategy had become a lesson in emotional survival. When we returned home, he didn't go to his room. He went to the art supplies I had procured for him. He didn't take out a fresh sheet of paper. He took one of his crumpled, failed attempts and carefully smoothed it out. I watched from a distance as he picked up a brush. He didn't mix a perfect, cheerful green. He mixed a dark, murky color, the hue of a stormy sky. And he began to paint, not a perfect pair, but the one I had described. He painted a single, isolated pair on a vast, empty background. Its skin was technically flawless, but at its core was a deep, spreading bruise of purple and black, a flaw so profound it seemed to suck the light from the paper. He was painting his truth, the truth I had forced him to see. And as I watched him, I felt the strange, aching pain in my own chest loosen its grip just a little. The system saw a boy being broken down. But I saw a boy, for the very first time, starting to build something real from the rubble. He was learning to paint his own bruises, and in doing so, he was learning they didn't have to define him. They could be the source of his strength. The week of the art exhibition crawled by, thick with a tension I could taste. It was different from the cold dread of the system's directives. This was a nervous, humming energy, centered entirely on the small boy who moved through the penthouse with a quiet, focused intensity I'd never seen before. He was no longer just enduring, he was creating. And the act had transformed him. He didn't show me his progress. He would emerge from his room for meals, his fingers often stained with paint a murky indigo or a somber umber and his eyes distant, seeing a world only he could access. The perfect, silent child was gone, replaced by an artist consumed by his vision. I found myself tiptoeing around him, a strange reversal of our roles. The wicked ant, was afraid to break his concentration. The system, of course, was not so delicate. Directive. Final preparation. Reinforce the consequences of failure. The ultimatum stands. On the morning of the exhibition, I found him standing in the foyer, dressed in the little suit I'd mandated. He was holding a flat, carefully wrapped package, his painting. His knuckles were white. Nervous? I asked, my voice cool. He nodded, unable to speak. Good, I said, the word ablaid. Fear is a motivator. Remember, mediocrity means the end of your lessons. Master Finn will be there. Your humiliation will be public and absolute. I leaned down, close to his ear. Do not disappoint me. It was the final, cruel push. The one the system demanded. I saw him swallow hard, his small atoms apple-bobbing. But as he looked up at me, I saw something else in his eyes, flickering beneath the fear. A spark of defiance. He believed in his bruised pair. The Veritas Academy auditorium was a sea of chattering parents and proud, beaming children. Canvases of bright sunflowers, smiling family portraits, and fantastical dragons lined the walls. It was a festival of childish joy and uncomplicated talent. Jiawei's solitary, wrapped painting felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. We found his assigned spot on the wall, a blank space between a riotous jungle scene and a sparkling mermaid. As he carefully unwrapped his painting and hung it, the chatter around us didn't just die. It was sucked into a vacuum. There it was. The bruised pair. It was more powerful than I could have imagined. The technique Master Fun had beaten into him was evident in the flawless, almost hyper-realistic skin of the fruit. But it was the bruise that commanded attention. It wasn't just a splash of color, it was a vortex. Layers of deep purple, sickly yellow, and angry black swirled at the pair's core, a palpable manifestation of internal decay. The fruit was isolated on a vast, empty canvas, a single, tragic note in an overwhelming silence. The other parents glanced at it, then quickly away, discomfort plain on their faces. They didn't know what to make of it. It was too raw, too honest for this celebratory environment. Then, Master Finn arrived. He moved through the crowd like a warship, his presence causing a ripple of deference. He barely glanced at the other artworks, his critical gaze sweeping the walls until it landed on Jiawei's piece.
He stopped.
Utterly still. He stood before it for a full minute, his face an unreadable mask. The entire section of the auditorium had fallen silent, watching the master. Jiawei had shrunk back, trying to hide behind my legs, anticipating the scathing critique that would end his dreams. Master Fin turned. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at Jiawei. You listened, he said, his voice low and gravelly, but carrying in the hush. He pointed a bony finger at the painting. This is not a child's painting. This is a statement. You have painted the truth that lies beneath the perfect skin. The loneliness. The pressure. His eyes, sharp as flint, flickered to me for a fraction of a second, and I felt a jolt of panic. Did he see me in that bruise? This is the first honest work I have seen from a student in a decade. He turned back to the painting. The title? Jiawei's voice was a mouse-like squeak. The bruised pair, master. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. Apartment. Then he did something that sent a shockwave through the room. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a small, embossed card, and handed it to Jiawei. The junior exhibition at the Xanadu Port Modern Art Gallery, Master Fin said. They have a slot next month. This is your entry pass. Do not be late. He gave one last, long look at the painting, then turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Jiawei stood frozen, the precious card clutched in his hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. The other parents now looked at the painting with new, bewildered respect. The object of their pity had just received the highest accolade in the room. The system was screaming in my head. Anomaly. Outcome deviates from public humiliation parameter. Target has achieved unprecedented validation. Logic error. I had to act. I had to reassert control. I had to be the wicked ant. I grabbed Jiawei's arm, my grip tight enough to make him gasp. I pulled him away from the admiring crowd, into a quiet corner. Do not let this go to your head, I hissed, my face a mask of fury. A fluke. A moment of luck. He pities you, that is all. This changes nothing. You will attend this gallery show, and when you fail on a larger stage, the fall will be that much harder. This is not a victory. It is a postponement of your inevitable failure. The joy in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a weary understanding. He nodded, slipping the gallery card into his pocket, as if it were a secret he had to hide. But as we drove home, the silent car filled with the weight of what had just happened, I saw him sneak a glance at his reflection in the window. And for a fleeting second, his fingers brushed against the pocket where the card was hidden, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. He had seen the truth. The world had seen his bruise and called it art. My words were just noise now. And the system, for the first time, had no directive. It could only register the anomaly. Its prized subject of psychological pressure had not broken under the weight of a public challenge. He had used the pressure to create a diamond. And it had no idea what to do next. The flawless, controlled experiment had just developed a profound and beautiful crack. The silence in the penthouse after the gallery invitation was a fragile, crystalline thing. It wasn't the old, heavy silence of oppression, but the breathless quiet after a thunderclap. Jiawei moved through the rooms with a new, quiet confidence that even my sharpest barbs couldn't completely pierce. He had been validated by an authority outside my control, and the knowledge was a shield. The system, meanwhile, was recalibrating. The static in my mind was no longer a steady hum but a series of sharp, frustrated pings, like a machine trying to solve a problem with no logical solution. Reassessing target parameters. Validation event has created anomalous confidence metrics. Countermeasure required. It was searching for a new angle, a way to reassert the narrative of neglect. I felt like a chess player whose opponent had just made a move from an entirely new rulebook. The countermeasure arrived 2 days later, not as a directive, but as a phone call. The screen lit up with a name I had only seen in the family records, Zhu Qingli. My husband. The ghost in our gilded machine. My heart leapt into my throat. I took a steadying breath, channeling Meilin's cold efficiency before answering. Yes. Meilin. His voice was deeper than I'd imagined, smooth and laced with a weary authority. My meetings in Europe concluded early. I'll be home tonight. Tonight. The words sent a jolt of pure panic through me. I had grown accustomed to being the sole warden of this prison. His return was a wild card, an unknown variable that could unravel everything. Is there a problem? He asked, sensing my hesitation. No, I said, my voice clipped. Everything is adequate. I ended the call before I could say more, my mind racing. Directive: maintain character cohesion in front of Zhu Qingli. Any deviation will be interpreted as a breach. The stakes had just skyrocketed. I wasn't just performing for a child and a disembodied AI anymore. I had to convince the man who knew Malin best, or at least the man who had married her, that I was her. I spent the day in a state of high alert, preparing the stage. I instructed Mrs. Lee to prepare a specific, blandly nutritious meal. I laid out one of Malin's most severe, high-necked dresses. I was building the set for a play I'd never rehearsed. When the key turned in the penthouse door that evening, the air shifted. Jiawei, who had been reading on the sofa, went perfectly still, his book forgotten in his lap. Lucky, who had been dozing at his feet, lifted his head and let out a low, uncertain whine.
Zhu Qingli stepped inside.
He was taller than I'd expected, with the same sharp, intelligent eyes as Jiawei, but where the boys were pools of quiet observation, the man's were scanners, taking in every detail of the room in a single, sweeping glance. He was handsome in a way that was both imposing and tired, his expensive suit worn like a second skin. His gaze landed on me first, a brief, impersonal acknowledgement. Then it moved to Jiawei. "Father," Jiawei said, his voice a formal, practiced whisper. He did not run to him. He did not smile. "Jiawei."
Zhu Qingli's Tone was equally formal.
He walked over and placed a hand briefly on his son's head, a gesture that felt more ritual than affectionate. "You've grown." His eyes then fell on Lucky. The dog, emboldened by the weeks of love, wagged his tail tentatively. "What is this?" Zhu Qingli asked, his voice dangerously calm. I stepped forward, my heart hammering. This was my first test. "A lesson in consequences," I said, my voice the perfect imitation of Malin's cold practicality. He begged for the creature after it destroyed the garden. I decided the responsibility of caring for a weak, dependent animal would be a more potent teacher than simple punishment. He is learning the burden of his poor choices firsthand. I held my breath. It was the same logic I'd used on the system. Zhu Qingli looked from the healthy, well-groomed dog to Jiawei's protective posture. He grunted a non-committal sound. "See that it doesn't become a distraction." He moved towards the dining room, and the moment passed. I had survived the first encounter. Dinner was a strained, silent affair. The only sounds were the clinking of cutlery against porcelain. I watched them, these two males who were so genetically similar yet emotionally oceans apart. Zhu Qingli asked Jiawei a series of perfunctory questions about school, receiving monosyllabic answers in return. There was no warmth, no curiosity. It was a performance of paternal duty. This, I realized, was the original source of the poison. My wickedness was just a symptom. The disease was this profound, chilling neglect from the one person who is supposed to offer unconditional love. As Mrs. Lee cleared the plates, Zhu Qingli turned to me. "The financial reports look sufficient. You've managed the household adequately." It was the highest praise he could offer. A comment on efficiency. "Of course," I replied, my tone implying it was beneath notice. "Though your son's recent artistic endeavors have been a drain on both time and resources." Jiawei flinched, his eyes darting to his father, fearing his disapproval. "Art."
Zhu Qingli raised an eyebrow.
"A frivolous pursuit. But I suppose as long as his grades don't suffer, it can be tolerated for now." He saw it as a hobby, a distraction. He had no idea about the bruised pair, the gallery invitation, the silent war being waged under his own roof. He was so focused on the balance sheets of the future that he was blind to the boy sitting right in front of him. Later, as I prepared for bed, he entered the master bedroom. The space suddenly felt too small. He changed with his back to me, and the easy intimacy of a married couple was entirely absent. We were strangers sharing a room. He slipped into his side of the bed, the space between us a yawning chasm. "The company is expanding into the southern provinces. I'll be leaving again in 3 days." 3 days. A reprieve. "Fine," I said, turning off my bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. I lay there, listening to his steady breathing, my body tense. The system was quiet, seemingly satisfied with my performance. But a new, more complex fear had taken root. Zhu Qingli wasn't just an observer. He was an unwitting accomplice. His emotional absence was the foundation upon which my wickedness was built. To truly save Jiawei, I wasn't just fighting the system. I was fighting an entire ecosystem of neglect. And I was starting to realize, with a sinking feeling, that I might be the only person in this child's life who is truly, fiercely on his side, even if he would never, ever know it. The 3 days of Zhu Qingli's presence were a study in sustained tension. The air in the penthouse, which had begun to thaw, refroze into a permafrost of formality. Meals were silent tribunals. Even Lucky seemed to understand, curling into a tight, quiet ball under Jiawei's chair instead of pattering around hopefully. I performed my role with a robotic precision that left me emotionally drained. I was the efficient manager of the household, the stern disciplinarian for the child, the distant wife to the husband. The system registered only compliance, its static hum a satisfied purr. But the cost was a resurgence of that familiar, dizzying weakness in my limbs, a phantom pain from a life of constant performance. Zhu Qingli left as unceremoniously as he had arrived, with a brief nod and a reminder about the southern province's expansion. The moment the elevator doors closed, the penthouse didn't just fall silent. It seemed to exhale a breath it had been holding for 72 hours. Jiawei, who had been standing stiffly by the door, visibly sagged.
He didn't look at me.
He simply turned and walked towards his room, Lucky trotting at his heels. The relief was palpable, but it was tinged with a sadness that clenched my heart. His own father's departure was a liberation. I retreated to my office, the medical report on psychological stress feeling like a diagnosis burned into my soul. I had to find a new equilibrium. The system was a predator that learned. The art victory had put it on high alert. I needed a pressure valve, for both of us. The next morning, I found Jiawei in the living room, not with his art supplies, but with the dreaded advanced math workbook. He was staring at a page of complex fractions, his brow furrowed. The spark of the artist had been buried under the weight of expectation, once more. Directive: academic rigor must be maintained. Ensure completion of Chapter 5 by end of day. The command was a blunt instrument, but I had learned to wield my tools with more finesse. Stop, I said, my voice cutting through his frustrated concentration. He looked up, startled. That book is useless, I stated, walking over and snapping it shut. It teaches calculation, not thinking. I pointed to the sprawling cityscape beyond the window. The Lin Group's new flagship store is opening downtown. The construction budget was 20 million. The final cost was 22.4. Your task is not to solve for X. Your task is to find where the 4.4 million went. That is a real problem. His eyes widened. This was no longer about trains in a garage. This was about the empire he was meant to inherit. I don't know how, he admitted, a flicker of that old inadequacy in his eyes. Then you will learn, I said, handing him a tablet with access to the project's anonymized financials. Start with the invoices. Cross-reference material costs with market rates. Look for overtime payouts. Inefficiency is a leak, and you will find it. I gave him my most disdainful look. Or, are you only capable of painting fruit? It was the perfect wicked ant provocation. It questioned his practical utility while pushing him into a task of immense complexity. The system would see a crushing academic burden. He would see a treasure hunt. For the next 2 days, he was consumed. The apartment was littered with printouts. He created color-coded charts on his tablet, his small fingers flying across the screen. He asked Mr. Zhang hesitant questions about construction logistics. He was no longer a passive student. He was a junior auditor. He didn't find the full 4.4 million, of course. But on the third day, he came to me, clutching a sheaf of papers, his face flushed with a triumph he was trying hard to contain. Auntie, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. The interior marble. The invoices are for premium Italian Carrara, but the delivery manifests and quality inspection reports list a different, cheaper grade. The cost difference is over 800,000. I took the papers, my expression impassive as I scanned his meticulous notes. He had done it. He hadn't just found an error. He had uncovered deliberate fraud. Analysis. Target demonstrates unexpected analytical prowess. This deviation is efficient. Directive deemed accomplished. The system's approval was almost amusing in its clinical appreciation of his uncovered corruption. I looked down at him. The boy who painted his bruises had just dissected a financial one with the same quiet precision. Adequate, I said, my voice flat. You have identified a single leak. A competent manager would have already plugged it and had the responsible party prosecuted. I tossed the papers onto my desk. Do not expect praise for doing the bare minimum expected of your name. The light in his eyes dimmed, but it didn't go out. He was learning. My praise was a currency I could never spend, but my challenges were a language he was becoming fluent in. Yes, Auntie, he said, and there was a new note in his voice. Not defeat, but resolve. That night, I passed his room. The door was ajar. He was on the floor with Lucky, but he wasn't reading. He had the tablet again, and he was showing the dog his charts, his voice a low, confident murmur. And see, Lucky? The numbers here don't match the numbers here. That's how you know. He was teaching the dog. He was reinforcing his own knowledge by explaining it. It was a level of metacognition I hadn't expected. My harsh lessons in consequence and reality were forging a mind that was not just resilient, but shrewd. I leaned my head against the cool wall outside his door, the weight of my role feeling heavier than ever. He was growing, adapting, becoming stronger in the exact ways the system wanted, but for all the wrong reasons. Or perhaps for the only reasons that mattered. The echo of his father's visit was finally fading, replaced by the sound of a boy quietly, steadily, building a fortress of his own competence. And I, the architect of his pressure, was both his greatest antagonist and his most unintentional ally. The empty room was no longer just empty, it was filled with the silent, potent energy of a mind learning to fight back. The night before the junior exhibition at the Xanadu Port Modern Art Gallery, the penthouse was a silent battleground of anticipation. I could feel it thrumming in the air, a low-frequency tension that tightened the skin at the back of my neck. Jiawei had retreated into a shell of such profound stillness that even Lucky seemed hesitant to nudge him, lying instead with his head on his paws, watching his boy with worried eyes. The system had been ominously quiet since the invitation, a predator conserving energy before the pounce. I knew it was waiting. This public platform was a direct contradiction to its core programming of isolation and inadequacy. It would demand a reckoning. Final directive for gallery event: ensure the experience is associated with stress and impending failure. His work must be framed as an imposter in a world of true talent. The morning of the exhibition, I chose my armor with care. A severe, black sheath dress that felt more like a uniform and a sharp, dismissive demeanor I wore like war paint. When Jiawei emerged from his room, holding the carefully crated, bruised pair, he looked so small. He was wearing the same little suit, but it seemed to hang on him differently today, as if he were a knight preparing for a joust he never asked to enter. Remember, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet foyer. This is not an achievement. It is an assessment, and you are woefully underprepared. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. Yes, Auntie. The gallery was a temple of white walls and polished concrete, a world away from the cheerful chaos of the school auditorium. The air smelled of crisp money and subtle anxiety. The other young artists, accompanied by proud, beaming parents, clustered around their works. Their pieces were technically brilliant hyperrealistic portraits, sweeping landscapes showcasing a level of polish that came from years of encouragement. Jiawei's bruised pair looked alien in this context. It was hung in a corner, a deliberate placement by the curator that either signaled profound respect or subtle dismissal. Its raw, emotional honesty made the technically perfect works around it seem sterile, like plastic fruit next to something freshly plucked from a storm-ravaged tree.
People didn't crowd around it.
They approached, stopped, and fell silent. They would glance at the title card, then back at the painting, their expressions a complex mix of intrigue and discomfort. They were whispering. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the language of their body language, the slight tilts of the head, the crossed arms, the thoughtful frowns. To Jiawei, standing rigidly beside me, these whispers were daggers. Each hushed comment, each flickering glance, confirmed his deepest fear. He didn't belong here. He was an imposter. See how they look at it? I murmured, leaning down so only he could hear. The system demanded I twist the knife. They don't see art. They see a flaw, a curiosity. They are wondering what kind of child produces such a damaged thing. He flinched, his small hands clenching into fists at his sides. The spark of defiance I'd seen at the school show was guttering, threatened by this more sophisticated, more intimidating arena. Just then, an older couple, dripping in obvious wealth, paused before the painting. The woman leaned in, her nose wrinkling slightly. Such a melancholy subject for a child, she said to her companion, her voice carrying in the hushed space. One wonders about the home environment. The words were a perfectly aimed poison arrow. Jiawei's breath hitched. He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw the devastating realization that the world saw my wickedness reflected in his art, that the bruise they pitted was my fingerprint. It was the moment the system had wanted. The public humiliation, the association of his passion with pathology. I should have left it there. Mission accomplished. But I couldn't. A cold fury, white hot and entirely my own, ignited in my chest. It wasn't directed at him, but at the woman, at the gallery, at the entire world that wanted to box this complex, brilliant boy into a simple narrative of trauma. Before the system could issue another directive, I moved. I stepped forward, placing myself between the couple and the painting, my posture radiating a glacial authority that made the woman take a half step back. The home environment, I said, my voice not loud, but so sharp it seemed to cut the air, provided him with the clarity to see past superficial perfection. Something you evidently lack. I let my gaze sweep over her garish jewelry with blatant disdain. My nephew doesn't paint pretty lies for decoration. He paints truths that make the comfortable uncomfortable. If you find it melancholy, perhaps you should examine what in your own life you are desperately trying to gloss over. The woman's mouth fell open. Her husband sputtered, red-faced. They turned and scurried away, utterly dismantled. I turned back to Jawei. The shock on his face was absolute. I had not defended him. I had defended the painting. I had, in my own brutal way, validated its power. The script in my head was gone. I was off book. Listen to me, I said, my voice low and intense, for his ears only. They are whispering because you have said something they are too afraid to say themselves. You have made them feel something they spend their lives and fortunes trying to avoid. That is not failure. That is power. I gestured with my chin towards his painting. That bruise is your strength. Never forget it. I was no longer the wicked ant. For that single, perilous moment, I was his champion. The static in my mind erupted into a screeching alarm. Critical deviation. Character parameters breached. Host is exhibiting protective behavior. Initiating corrective protocol. A wave of dizzying nausea hit me, so strong I had to reach out and steady myself against the wall. The world swam, the white gallery lights blurring into a painful glare. It felt like my very cells were being ripped apart. Jiawei's eyes widened in alarm. Auntie. I straightened up, fighting to keep my face a mask, but the cost was immense. A trickle of blood, warm and metallic, seeped from my nose. I wiped it away with the back of my hand, a stark red smear against my pale skin. The system punishment was not just a threat anymore. It was a physical reality. Don't be dramatic, I forced out, my voice strained, pushing away his concern. The air in here is stale. It means nothing. But he had seen it. The crack in my armor. The blood. The unscripted defense. He looked from my face to the retreating backs of the chastised couple, then back to his painting, his expression a tumultuous sea of confusion and dawning, terrifying hope. The ride home was shrouded in a silence more profound than any we had shared before. The system had retreated, the alarm silenced, but its presence was a throbbing wound in my mind. I had crossed a line, and I had paid for it in blood. He didn't thank me.
He didn't speak.
He just sat, holding the now empty crate, staring out at the city lights as they blurred past. But as Mr. Zhang helped him out of the car at the penthouse, Jiawei paused and looked back at me. His gaze was no longer that of a scared child, but of a strategist assessing a new, unpredictable variable. He had seen the bruise on the pair. And now, for the first time, he had seen a crack in the flawless, unfeeling porcelain of his aunt. The game had changed forever. The metallic taste of blood was a brand on my tongue, a visceral receipt for my transgression. The elevator ride to the penthouse was a ascent into a new kind of hell, one where the warden was not just in my mind, but in my very blood and bone. The system's silence was no longer passive. It was the ominous quiet of a machine recalculating the most efficient way to break its tool. I could feel Jiawei's gaze on me, a physical weight. He didn't speak, but his silence was screaming with questions. Why did you defend my painting? Why were you bleeding?
Who are you?
I walked into the penthouse, my spine rigid, every step a conscious effort to project an authority I no longer felt. Lucky, sensing the shift, didn't bound over. He whined softly from the doorway of Jiawei's room. The excitement is over, I announced, my voice rough, scraping my throat. There will be no further indulgence of this artistic fantasy. Your focus will return to your practical studies. Is that clear? It was a retreat. a desperate, tactical withdrawal back behind the only walls that kept me safe, the persona of the wicked ant. The system had to see me reestablish control. Jiawei didn't argue. He just looked at me, his head tilted slightly, his eyes doing that thing I now recognized, not just seeing but observing. He was reading the microtremors in my hands, the tightness around my mouth that I couldn't fully relax. "Yes, Andy," he said, his voice neutral. Too neutral. He went to his room and closed the door. I stood alone in the vast, cold living room, the ghost of his perceptive stare clinging to me. The performance was getting harder. The cracks were showing, and my most astute audience member was taking notes. The next few days were a brutal pendulum swing. The system, as if to reassert its dominance, issued a flurry of petty, exhausting directives. Directive: the child's posture during meals is unacceptable. Correct it repeatedly. Directive: his bed is made to a 92% standard of perfection. Enforce 100%. Directive: the dog's water bowl is 1.5 centimeters out of place. Reprimand the child for his carelessness. I became a tyrant of trivialities. I nitpicked the angle of his fork, the fold of his pajamas, the volume of his breathing. It was mind-numbing, soul-crushing work. Each directive fulfilled was a small stone added to the wall between us, but I could feel the system's energy draining me with each one, a psychic vampire feeding on my compliance. The dizziness returned, more frequent now. A low-grade headache became my constant companion. I was a battery being systematically drained. Jiawei endured it all with a stoicism that was beginning to feel like pity. He would simply readjust his posture, remake his bed, move the water bowl, his eyes holding a new, unsettling understanding. He was no longer just a victim, he was a witness. The breaking point came over something absurd. A single, tiny Lego brick, a vibrant red one, left in the center of the living room rug. Lucky must have batted it out of Jiawei's room. Directive: this disarray is symbolic of a lax environment. Demand: he sort his entire collection by color and size. Tonight. It was midnight. He had school the next day. The directive was pure, unadulterated cruelty. I found him already in his pajamas, reading in bed. Lucky was curled up beside him. I delivered the command, my voice hollow with exhaustion. Jiawei looked from my face to the single red brick I held in my trembling hand.
He didn't sigh.
He didn't protest. He just put his book down, got out of bed, and walked to the large box of Legos in the corner. He didn't look at me as he began the mind-numbing task. The only sound was the soft click-clack of plastic as he started creating neat, color-coded piles. I stood there, watching him, the system's satisfaction a sickening buzz in my skull. This was it. This was my purpose. To break a child's spirit over a misplaced toy. And then, something inside me broke. A wave of vertigo so intense it stole my vision. The world tilted on its axis. I stumbled, my shoulder hitting the doorframe with a dull thud. I slid down to the floor, my head in my hands, unable to fight it anymore. The headache wasn't a headache, it was a drill boring into my temple. A fresh, warm trickle of blood escaped my nose, dripping onto the pristine white wool of the rug. Through a haze of pain, I saw Jiawei freeze. He dropped the Lego in his hand. For a long moment, he just stared at me, huddled and broken on his bedroom floor. Then he moved. He didn't run to me. He didn't call for Mrs.
Lee.
He walked to his ensuite bathroom with a quiet, deliberate purpose. I heard the sound of running water. He returned with a damp, cool washcloth and a glass of water. He knelt before me, his small face grim with concentration. He didn't speak. Gently, with a tenderness that shattered me, he pressed the cloth to the back of my neck. Then, he carefully wiped the blood from my upper lip. His movements were sure, practiced. He had done this for himself, I realized. In the quiet of his room, he had learned to tend to his own wounds. He held the glass of water to my lips. "Drink," he whispered, his voice firm. It was not a request from a child to an adult. It was a command. I drank, the cool water a bomb. The world slowly swam back into focus. He sat back on his heels, looking at me. The silence between us was no longer filled with fear or defiance. It was filled with a terrifying, unspoken truth. "The system hurts you when you are nice to me," he stated. It wasn't a question. My blood ran cold. I stared at him, my mask lying in shattered pieces around me. How long had he known? How much had he pieced together? I opened my mouth to deny it, to scold him, to retreat back into the safety of wickedness. But the words wouldn't come. The lie was too heavy to lift. I gave the tiniest, most imperceptible nod. He absorbed this, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't look triumphant. He looked resolved. He stood up, walked back to his Lego box, and picked up a single blue brick. He held it up, his gaze locking with mine. Then he deliberately dropped it into the red pile. It was a small act, a meaningless act of defiance in the grand scheme. But in that silent room, it was a declaration of war. He wasn't just refusing an order. He was telling me he understood the game. He was telling me he knew the cost.
And he was choosing to play.
He turned his back to me and continued sorting, his small shoulders set in a line of iron.
He was protecting me.
By disobeying, by being difficult, he was giving me an excuse to be the wicked ant, sparing me the system's wrath. I pulled myself to my feet, my legs weak, my soul laid bare. I left his room without another word, the image of that single blue brick in the red pile seared into my mind. The system, for once, was completely silent. It had witnessed the entire exchange. It had seen its primary subject not only decipher the nature of his oppression but actively begin to subvert it. The control it prized was slipping. And its most powerful weaponry was now, a known variable to the very boy I was meant to break. The silence in the penthouse was no longer empty. It was humming with a dangerous, new alliance. The silence after Jawei's declaration was not empty. It was a living thing, thick with unspoken truths and a terrifying, nascent alliance. I left his room on unsteady legs, the phantom sensation of the cool washcloth on my neck a brand of his compassion. The single blue Lego in the red pile was a flag planted on the battlefield of our shared prison. He knew, and he was fighting back in the only way he could by deliberately missorting his toys to give me an excuse for my wickedness. The system was ominously quiet for 3 days.
No directives, no static, no corrections.
It was as if the AI had suffered a catastrophic logic failure and was stuck in an infinite loop, trying to compute a scenario where its target of manipulation had become a co-conspirator. The pressure in my mind wasn't gone, but it had changed. It was the tense, waiting silence before a dam breaks. I played my part, of course. I criticized his imperfectly sorted Legos. I snapped at him for minor infractions. But the fire was gone from my performance. It was rote, a hollow recitation of lines from a play whose plot had been irrevocably altered. He would nod, his eyes holding that new, unsettling understanding, and say, "Yes, Auntie." We were both waiting. The break came on the 4th day. I was in my office, staring blankly at a financial report when the static returned. But it was different, a distorted, glitching crackle like a corrupted audio file. Paradox detected. Target resilience exceeds predicted parameters. Host compliance is generating counterproductive outcomes. The words were broken, stuttering. A flicker of something like panic bled through the digital voice. The wickedness algorithm is no longer optimal. It strengthens the target. It weakens the host. A wave of dizziness hit me, not from a directive, but from the system's own destabilization. I gripped the edge of the desk. "What are you saying?" I thought, pushing the question into the chaos. The primary objective is host survival via narrative compliance. Current path leads to host termination. Narrative is broken. The glitching intensified. The voice fragmented, losing its cold cohesion. Directive cannot be fulfilled. The story is wrong. The villain has created a hero. There was a final, screeching burst of static, a digital death rattle, and then a clear, simple chime. System offline. Narrative integrity failed. Host survival confirmed. You are free. The presence in my mind vanished. Not retreated. Vanished. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute. It was the most profound silence I had ever experienced. The hum that had been the backdrop of my second life for over a decade was just gone. I sat there, stunned, for what felt like an eternity. I was free. The leash was cut. The warden had left the prison. Tentatively, I formed a thought. System? Nothing. Only the quiet sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of the city. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, hysterical and disbelieving. It was over. I had won. We had won. I found Jiawei in the garden, sitting on a bench with Lucky, a sketchbook in his lap. He was drawing, not a pear, but the skyline of Xanadu Port, his lines confident and sure. He looked up as I approached. He must have seen something radically different in my face, in my posture, in the very air around me. The perpetual tension that had defined me for all the years he'd known me was simply absent. "Auntie," he asked, his voice cautious. I sat down beside him. The simple act of sitting next to him without a strategic, cruel purpose felt alien and wonderful. "It's gone," I said, my voice soft with awe. "The thing, the pressure, it's gone." He didn't ask what I meant. He just looked at me, his young old eyes searching mine. He saw the truth there. The war was over. "What does that mean?" he whispered. "It means," I said, my throat tight, "that I don't have to be this anymore." I gestured vaguely at myself, at the cold, severe woman I had been forced to embody. He was silent for a long moment, processing this seismic shift in his universe. "What will you be instead?" The question was so simple, so profound. It stole my breath. What would I be? I had no script.
No directives.
For the first time in this life, and in my last, my future was entirely my own to write. "I don't know," I admitted, a genuine, unforced smile touching my lips for the first time. It felt strange on my face. "But I would like to find out. With you." He looked down at his sketchbook, then back at me. A slow, tentative smile spread across his own face, erasing years of solemn worry. It was the smile of the carefree child he had never been allowed to be. "Okay," he said. Just one word. But it held a universe of possibility. Later that evening, as we ate a dinner that was not punctuated by my criticisms, the penthouse felt different. The walls seemed less like barriers and more like shelter. The silence was no longer oppressive, but peaceful. Jiawei looked at me across the table. "The art gallery called today, while you were away. They want to purchase The Bruised Pair for their permanent collection." I looked at him, this brilliant, resilient boy I had been tasked with breaking, who had instead forged himself into something unbreakable. The painting that had been born from my mandated cruelty was now being enshrined as art. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I said I'd think about it," he replied. "I wanted to ask you first." He wasn't asking for permission. He was asking for my opinion. As an equal. As family. "I think," I said, choosing my words with a care that was born of love, not fear, "that it is your truth. And you can decide what to do with it." He nodded, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "I think I'll sell it and put the money in my college fund. For industrial design." The future tycoon wanted to be a designer. The system's grand plan was ashes. As I sat there in the warm, quiet glow of the evening, I understood. The system hadn't failed because I was a bad villain. It had failed because its core premise was flawed. It believed wickedness could only create a monster. It never accounted for the fact that love, even when disguised as its opposite, could create a hero. The story was over. Our story was just beginning. And for the first time, it was a story we would write ourselves.